June 2019, this month in cybersecurity. Like all previous months, it seems like a lot of things are happening, so looking forward to the discussion. We obviously start all of our webinars with a framework and just a discussion about the fact that that security is a large topic, a lot of things to talk about. Framework allows us to kind of talk about things, I guess, relative to where they sit within a relatively simple framework, as you see on the screen. This lays out 5 steps from identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover. We like the fact that reaction is equal in size to prevention, and as well as detection being at the heart of things. Seeing that slide go a little too often there. So let's take a look at some of the things we've seen in the news. We've been doing this this month in cyber for quite a while now, and this month, like many others, had just almost too many stories to talk about. So the challenge is always trying to categorize them into some crisp messaging for you. But one of the stories that certainly hopefully ran across your eyes was the fact that the logo here is RMCB, but essentially it's the American Medical Collection Agency, or you might know them as the collection agency for Quest or LabCorp. Anywhere where your health records might be, they had some issues that we're going to talk about. Here in the month of June, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection had some issues in June with regards to loss of data, and we'll certainly discuss that. More loss of data at hotels, and we're going to kind of distinguish the difference between identification and authentication, right? A little bit of a nebulous topic there, but hoping to try and paint that picture a little clearer too. And with all the loss of data that was going on this month and all the stories, at some point we just kind of need to talk about just assuming breach or assuming loss of data. I also wanted to kind of update you on the city of Baltimore. I think this was a story from last month, and give you some updates as to what's going on there, as well as some additional ransomware stories. And there turned out to be so many stories that turned out to be either repetitive or not repetitive, but like offshoots of stories that we've talked about before. And ended up just assembling one slide of just and so I just call this the update slide. I'm just going to go through a bunch of stories and update you. I also have some things that happened to me personally too that we can discuss as part of the security stories too. So without further ado, let's get into it. I did give you a list so that when you receive this as a PDF afterwards, you're able to look up any of these stories, look into any of the details. Those are all hot links to the stories themselves, as well as they're linked on the slides individually. All right, so RMCB, which is stands for Retrieval Masters Creditors Bureau, or as you might know it as AMCA, which basically is the parent company or the collection company, if you will, for Quest and LabCorp. When they're doing billing for health records, you can imagine that they need to outsource debt collection, right? Hey, this person didn't pay their bill, and we need to go out and get money from them, and with that they have to share records. And unfortunately, in sharing some of the records, and these aren't necessarily health records, but what services were performed, what dates, and so forth, all of that data effectively during the course of looks like from August 2018, that's almost a year ago, until March of 2019, the breach had occurred. This breach appeared to be happening on their website or through their website. They had a payment page, and if you'll recall a story from I think 2 months ago, it appears that MageCart was basically MageCart's the term, but effectively it's there's some code that's put on web pages to steal information from that web page, and they were subject to that, very similar to what British Airways and Ticketmaster, and if you'll recall those stories from the past, it appears this website is also infected with that MageCart, and that's unconfirmed at this point. They're still evaluating. But effectively, I'm trying to give you the timeline here a little bit. So for a year they were breached, and at the end of 2018, without any disclosure, at the end of 2018, their staff was slashed from 113 to 25 people. Yet they didn't announce a breach. They stopped their web payment page on March 30th, and then May 14th they notified Quest, and in June 4th they notified others too. So agencies reporting on Quest and LabCorp, and then on June 19th, just less than a week ago, they filed for bankruptcy. So the graphic on the right is meant to do that. It's to show you that, you know what, this happens, and this breach, just like many of the stories we've told before, is a cyclical thing. They'll announce the breach, they'll say we're sorry. Oftentimes there's, oh man, we should have done better. They'll send out a customer letter with apology, give you 2 years of monitoring in this case, and then we'll move on to the next company. Okay. We've been doing this for 4 years, and I could pull up stories from 4 years ago where this was occurring too. So in general, we're seeing this happen relatively often. This story shouldn't be any different. I think I already announced the layoffs that they had, and I guess where this became impactful for you potentially is it appears that these folks may have been going after health savings accounts, and oftentimes health savings accounts have credit cards or debit cards that can go in and access those monies, and it's those cards that are of particular concern for this breach. Okay. All right, good old U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. Similar story to loss, from losses before, but now this is the government. This happened in the month of June. A couple sources pointed out in the bottom right-hand corner. This has to do with facial recognition technology. They actually stole the facial footprints of 100,000 people. This was shared inadvertently through a contractor who had about 100,000 records on a laptop and improperly uploaded it. And the irony of it is this occurred in June, and this happened to happen in the exact month. So I give the similar graphic to what happened before. This happened in the exact month that the Customs and Border Patrol is using biometric at Orlando as well as 10 other airports, including O'Hare, as their one method for determining who people were. So we don't know if there was coordination in the timing of this. It seems like it was an inadvertent breach, but facial identity is increasingly becoming, that's the gold standard for how to detect people, as the Customs and Border Patrol was going to, and just at that point they start losing this data. So as we know, facial recognition data is becoming more widely used. Facebook and Apple might be good examples of that. So more loss. We've got iPhones, and I think everyone has always taken solace that iPhones were they have good practices, good encryption. If you'll recall the case from 6 months ago, maybe a little longer, where there was a court case about having to crack the phone and the ability to crack the phone and who could do it and how do we get in there, and all the while Apple trying to maintain very high standards with regards to what barriers you have to get across to get to their data. Well, long story short is the company. There's a company out there that has determined that they can crack. This is a reputable company that has been able to prove that they can get on any iPad or iPhone with any iOS at any time. And what that tool and the availability of that tool appears to be. Looks like it's going to be copied, and looks like the ability to validate that an iPhone indeed has privacy might be suspect moving forward. So again, the story here is not necessarily one of dire warning as much as to know that privacy and the availability of data is getting pretty prolific, and even the last bastion, if you will, of privacy, which might be an iOS lockdown OS, may still have issues. And this story, and so I guess the overall messaging here is, what if we started thinking about, and there's a great article here in the bottom right about making Social Security numbers public. It might be a good read for you afterwards, but it distinguishes and does a good job, I think, of distinguishing between identity, which when you're going to a hotel, you might say, my name is Frank. and immediately they ask you for an identification, which you provide them in terms of a driver's license, and then they validate with the picture that your face looks like that. So that's more identification. So there's identity, your name, and authentication, which is validation of that. Similarly, in the online world, we have identity, which is our email address, or in some cases could be social. But the password, the story goes on to say that Social Security numbers were never meant to be an identity source. They were, started being issued by post offices back in 1936, obviously well before they could have thought that these would be the crown jewels of someone's identity. But now they're serving as a national identification number, especially in some systems. And we'll talk about that as in terms of Social Security Administration, the VA, Medicare, and so forth, and how Social Security numbers are still being used in those cases too. So in general, just kind of want you not to confuse you nearly as much as just kind of get you thinking about assuming breach, and if I assumed my data was out there, how would I treat it differently? So here's some update stories. I'm not sure if PowerPoint, it does. It doesn't allow me to kind of zoom in on each of the one's stories here, but if you're using PowerPoint, you're actually allowed to jump in on each of these stories by clicking on them, but I also can just kind of thumb through them. So let's just give some quick updates on some stories from either months or years past even. Hopefully some of these may be familiar to you. Baltimore. The good news is, this is a story from last month. If you didn't know, the city of Baltimore had some ransomware issues that occurred in May. Even as of end of May, many of their services were down. The very latest update I can provide to you on Baltimore is that the event is going to cost them, to date, has cost them $18 million, whereas the ransomware demand was only $75,000. The water bills still were not able to go out in the month of June. This was an update just from a few days ago. They're still recovering some of their servers, but after 6 weeks, they were able to get communication restored for most of their employees. So between 4 and 6 weeks is how long it took for them to get their mailboxes back, and let's say a majority of their servers. But several key services are still not working in the month in the town of Baltimore. This kind of parallels a non-updated story, so let's get past that one. And we're now at about 50 major cities that have been hit with ransomware in the last year. Baltimore being obviously a very sizable one. Here's a story that you may have read about, which is called Riviera Beach. Beautiful town in Florida. This town concluded, and it was the board called an emergency meeting. They essentially concluded that yes, ransomware had impacted all of their systems, and no, they didn't have any way to recover the city's files. Doesn't mean they were slacking in terms of backups. They could have had great backups. However, as we've seen in other cases, in other stories that we've told before, people are actually people with credentials that want to do harm and are intending ransomware on a network to solicit money, are actually being very smart about going in and deleting or corrupting backups also. So we'll kind of talk about one of the solutions for that, but essentially in this case, this city decided to pay $600,000. Additionally, they authorized $900,000 in accelerated spending for a number of workstations and servers that they determined it was just too costly to get the ransomware off there, so why not just give some new workstations and throw those others out? So essentially they've decided in an overnight board meeting to have $1.5 million expenditure, just with no guarantee necessarily that the data was going to get back. Their insurance company is actually doing the ransomware negotiation on their behalf and got it down to $600,000. 50 major cities have been hit in the last year. Some are paying, some are not, and there's an interesting list and a discussion as to how and why. You can see in Riviera, Florida's case, there really was very little discussion. They were like, we have no other choice, as their backups were all completely hosed to. So one of the key concepts there, and we won't drill into it too hard here, is the idea that backups, the old 3-2-1 principle, right? You should have 3 backups of your data in 2 locations, and do 1 test recovery as portions of that too. So the offline backups pictured there at the bottom are how we run our managed backup services, and just kind of wanted to make sure that you were aware that offline backups are becoming critical and could be the golden ticket between whether you're going to pay ransomware or not pay ransomware as the only means for recovery of your files. In addition, obviously, we need to test backups and show that they can be restored. All right, back to another update story. I think this was, it looks like back from April of this year. There was some discussion about GPS spoofing and how over by the house of Vladimir Putin, how GPS didn't work, right? And on GPS maps, how GPS could be tricked to not show where you're at, and how it was impacting shipping lanes and so forth over there in the Black Sea. The update is really from this month. I guess I don't have it as a build. In any case, there is a story, and it's referenced earlier, and I guess the update I would like to give you is that on Sunday, June 9th, just a few weeks ago, aircraft within the United States with certain GPS systems were indicating a fail and basically unavailable. This happened on a Sunday. It only caused a few hundred flights to be canceled. Some flights with that equipment were told not to take off, and flights that were in flight were manually guided using other systems. But GPS tampering is here, and it's something that is a scary prospect. There's not a ton we can do about it, but I guess I wanted to let you know, in case you have systems that rely on GPS, about the capability of GPS spoofing. We've discussed in the past Social Security and the idea of that there is an online portal for Social Security, and that the guidance from the Social Security Administration is to actually go in and make a claim on your Social Security, set up your account. This is all guidance that we had discussed before, as outlined in the blog that's on your page. This is replacing the paper statements potentially that you used to get, showing a speculation as to what you'll get in Social Security and so forth and so on. The update I wanted to provide to you, and I don't have it in here. It's a big banner across the page, but the update I wanted to give you is we have an organization that we're aware of where the top 4 executives had tax files, taxes filed on their behalf via the IRS. They received a letter and so forth. So it's almost like the information from their system, either from their systems or from outside systems, was gathered, and they were kind of a part of a targeted IRS filing. And so there's some things that you can do on the Social Security Administration side to sort of lock that down. The IRS has significant guides called Taxpayer Guide to Identity Theft, which is referenced in the article. And essentially, there's a lot of just, contact the FTC, call the IRS, and they provide a phone number, call your credit bureaus, and so forth. So there's not a lot you can do outside of that, but one of the preventative measures that I wanted to just kind of emphasize was the idea of claiming your Social Security, and as a good piece of advice, they do have multi-factor authentication security set up on those accounts. All right, these 2 slides here, the WannaCry, hopefully doesn't make you want to cry. Back when it came out, I don't think it was highly impactful here in the United States, but you may recall this back from, I think it was August of last year. No, it was in mid-2017, 2 years ago. But effectively, it impacted significantly the XP operating system and, what we'll call legacy systems. The patch had been out there, but a lot of organizations did not heed that advice and patch. And WannaCry, in a very short time frame, impacted a number of systems internationally. the update I wanted to provide to you on WannaCry is today's WannaCry will be called Bluekeep. Okay, and Microsoft, the National Homeland Security, and others have been warning for weeks now that Bluekeep has the potential to be as big as WannaCry, if not worse. It's impacting all systems from Windows 2000 to 2008. It is there's a patch that was released, and Microsoft went out of their way to provide a patch even for Windows XP, and as well as Windows 7 systems. So XP, Windows 7, and your Windows servers all need to have this patch. They need to have it now, and you need to have good patching mechanism and kind of proof that that's in place. All right, there's the that one does have a build on it. All right, the other story I wanted to update you on, I think you may recall this one if you were attending back on Apple phone phishing. This is essentially, this came from January, where it looks like Apple support is calling you. In reality, what they end up having you do is try to get you to purchase a Google Play card, usually a $500 denomination. They then use that Google Play card to go purchase entities that they like. This is all set up through a legitimate phone number, and it's basically some phone phishing, it's called. And but it can look, if you got a phone call, it looked like the left-hand side, would you answer it? Well, the only update I had to you on that was that one of my coworkers received 40 such calls within a 1-month time period. So this is out there. It's still active. In fact, he just got these calls in the last few weeks. SIM swappers. So we've been chatting about SIM swapping. I think the update I have here, SIM swapping, for those that need a little refresher, is the idea that the SIM card within your phone can be deactivated simply by convincing an AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile store member that, hey, my phone was stolen, and providing essentially the credentials or the enough information about you that they could assume that the person that's in the store is the person that really that SIM belongs to. And they essentially, what you see on your phone is all of a sudden you have no network data service. And that means that your phone has been SIM swapped. I had a particular story where this occurred to me, and someone in California was at a Best Buy and had convinced them that that they were me, effectively. And so they walked away with a SIM that was burned for them, which was my credentials. And let's look forward to what our SIMs are being used for, our phones are being used for today. They're being used for access, potentially as a second factor, into banks and into other and into company networks. So the update I have on this is from a ZDNet article that's highlighted there at the bottom. It might be a good read for you just to kind of see where SIM swapping can go to. I certainly have told the story about millions of dollars being ripped off from some executives through Bitcoin and people doing impersonation. In this particular case, this was a content provider to ZDNet. Basically he writes stories. He's got a Twitter account. He's got a Google account, where he's been doing a lot of research and communicating with a lot of folks. And in addition to $25,000 in Bitcoin that he lost, that his bank was more than happy to provide to an external source because they thought it was him, he also lost access to his Google, his mail, and his Drive, and he lost with 8 years of history, as well as his Twitter account, which has 13 years of history. So for him, the data loss was even more significant than the loss of the monies itself. All right, Equifax story. I'll tell this one quickly. Hopefully we all remember the Equifax from yesteryear. A lot of our data got out there then. The update is the fact that the U.S. Post Office, Social Security, Veterans Affairs, and Medicare, Medicaid are still using a lot of knowledge-based ways of validating that we are who we say we are, and yet that knowledge is now becoming common knowledge, right? Assume breach, right? A lot of that data is out there. And this last story, it was about passwords and how, these are the 50 most used passwords. And I guess my update there was there are some technical controls Microsoft came out with to help guess and basically create banned list, not only of dictionary attacks, but also maybe of things for your organization's name and other things that you really don't want people assembling passwords around your company's name or easily guessed phrases. And so there's some new technology out that Microsoft has involved in Active Directory. There's no cost to it, but in implementation, it's something that can help you avoid bad password creation when users are going through password changes. So we spent all the time talking about stories, and I just want to take 2 minutes to kind of say, decompress and say, okay, what do we do about it? And at the end, I would say you do the following. You have to do your best that you can do. And the best that we feel organizations, kind of the level playing field for an organization, is to do the following things, which we have bundled into a package. One is, we think it's logical for you to look out on the dark web, kind of like Discover does for their personal credit cards. Just surface an initial report of kind of what the dark web results are, and then continuously monitor your domain for any dark web results. It's logical to do it. I'm not going to say it's going to stop every problem, but it's certainly smart to keep your eye open to where nefarious activities are occurring. We've chatted extensively about our Office 365 security practice. As people put a lot of data out there, it's logical to check what we think are 50+ attributes that need to be looked at on a pretty consistent basis. We think it's logical with all this discussion about internet and where things are going, all the web requests, whether they be links, browsers, or applications, if they have to go to say, hey, here's where I'm going before they go there, and there's a database that says, no, you don't want to go there, that's a known bad location, it's a great backstop for all the internet activity that you're doing. And that's a bundled in service that we're throwing. You can't train your employees enough. You can't expect them to be perfect, right? At the same time, a formal training program, both in person as well as video-based, and monthly testing can at least move the needle a little bit to make you better than you were today. If you want to get out of the idea of you managing antivirus or you doing patching, that's what we do for 2,000+ systems a month, and we're good at it. We take on the risk of doing it properly. We lighten the load on your IT staff to free up maybe a little bit of their time to focus on project work. We figure between patching and antivirus, you might be freeing up 10-15% of their time from that perspective. So very simple. We think on the client side, focus on that. And on the server side, as we've kind of mentioned in previous webinars, we can take on server and network activities with all of the listed activities on the right-hand side. This is our Pulse Complete server and network, and that complements our security bundle from the previous side, which is more focused on end users. As a wrap, as a way to kind of dabble in things, you certainly can try any of these services. We offer any of those, free coffee, all of those items are free. Certainly check our website and you'll see any of those offerings there. By way of notification, just want to let you know we are hold the date for 7/19. We're having what we're calling an Azure Pizza Party. It will be at a Giordano's. And when you get the link to here, feel free to register. And we also have been busy and active blogging, hopefully about some topics that are relevant for you to do further reading. Thank you guys very much for attending.